All right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Nobody you'd rather spend it with than each other. Although I'm not sure exactly why I wore a blue tie. It's Valentine's Day and the Chiefs parade today. So I'm not sure exactly what the thought process was behind that, but welcome to you all. Hope your semesters are going well. First of all, old business. Trust you've all had a chance to, we lost one. We will consider approval of the January 17 minutes. Well, let's see. We don't, we lost our quorum when we lost Went. So how about we come back to that one? Any issues that we need to follow upon related to our January 30th conference call? My notes don't indicate any, but want to make sure we leave time for that. Any follow-up? Okay. All right, we'll go back up to old business. Approval of the January 17th, 2024 minutes. Would entertain a motion to approve. Okay, we have a motion from Regent Dicus.
I can second.
Second from Regent Winter. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Moving on to new business, you'll recall at our January meeting, we heard from a number of our internal auditors, and pleased to have with us today Tammy Norman from Emporia State University. So welcome, Tammy. You do.
You just have to push the button.
Yeah, you want to turn the microphone on. Yeah, until it turns green. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I'm Tammy Norman, and I'm the Chief Auditor for Emporia State University, and I'm here to show you our annual report and our audit plan. Okay, what do I do? There we go. Thank you. Okay, there are 6 requirements that I'm required to come to you with and report on, and it's the audit charter. Ours is up to date. I need to the requirement of independence, and I do have an adequate reporting line. I have unrestricted access to senior management and to you, and no restrictions were placed on my scope of work. The audit plan, progress, and results are in this presentation, and we'll go through them. The 4th is resources. My resources are adequate. The conformance with the Code of Ethics and Standards with the Institute of Internal Auditors. I am a certified internal auditor, and so my work was performed in conformance with the rules and guidelines. And the management's response to risk this year totally exceeded my expectations. Our general counsel became also the vice president of risk assessment, and we are implementing enterprise risk management from the ground floor up. And I'm there to facilitate and to guide, but I'm very impressed that we will finally have a very good, robust risk assessment process. Speaking of required reporting, there are going to be new standards that go in effect around the world for the global profession, and it affects SEC filed companies too, effective in January of next year. And what they've done is they've divided the standards into 5 domains, and domain 3 affects this board because the board, the domain 3 now includes essential conditions for an effective internal audit function. And how this affects the board is that It affects how the board establishes, approves, and supports the mandate of internal audit. And it will require a new charter from each one of the universities. It affects you and how the board establishes and protects internal audits, functions, independence, and qualifications. So it affects the reporting relationships, the attributes, and the practices of how we interact with you. It will also affect how you oversee the internal audit function and the entire function's effectiveness. So we have to establish some communication criteria and processes for escalating matters of importance. We already do have something in place to come to you freely if we need to. But that was the end of what we had. So I talked to my colleagues, and so we are proposing that at your convenience, we have a meeting between the university auditors and Fiscal Affairs and Audit Committee so that we can inform you. Part of our responsibilities are to inform you of the new standards, and then you can tell us how you want to craft those processes and those communication lines. And so I brought that to you. Okay.
Do you have a recommendation on when that meeting should occur?
I would defer to Elaine because she knows those types of meetings. We're open all year long.
Why don't we get together and offline and then talk about the best time, the optimal time relation to our cycle and where we're at? But I mean, I could foresee it happening sooner and
Sure.
we can incorporate new information if we need to amend board policy. I don't know if it needs to go that far, but whatever, we can talk about that.
That's great.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So progress to the plan. I had 5 projects that I brought last year. One was our hotline, and it is now implemented. Both the administrative and investigative roles. I'll pop to the next slide. Just I urge you to go and visit the internal audit homepage to see how we've set up the anonymous reporting hotline. We do have a third-party provider. We use the same one as KU, K-State, and I believe Pitt State too. I'm part of the HLC leadership team. We crafted Criterion 2, and we're getting ready for a comprehensive review in this fall. So I'm part of it. I'm part of the risk assessment process with the enterprise-wide methodology. We did suspend the talent management audit. There were just not enough resources at the time. And I'm currently finishing up a conflict of interest review of our affiliate corporations. I had some additions. I had an emergent request that was simply just an emergent request to look at how we have so many physical keys, and we're also going to a keyless entry. So that's partially completed with a draft report. For the next one, the athletic project, we took all of the recommendations from the UCAH task force. Emporia State had 48 of them in that report. And so we've organized it and we have a cadence so that we can get those management actions and recommendations done. We're doing the same with IT, and they have LPA audits with recommendations. They have other risk assessments that they've done. We're incorporating that into our cadence. I've been the chair for a search committee for an ISO. It failed. We're now going to open that and go for a CISO. And then I do a project for the MIAA, my MIAA colleagues. It came back to internal audit, which is fine. And we collect the financial reports of expenses and revenues. And then we put them into a workbook so that our colleagues can see and benchmark themselves against our peers. Okay, other current responsibilities I do have a grad assistant for spring of 2024. And then I'm an adjunct all year long in the spring, summer, and in the fall. I serve on the disclosure committee. I'm on the search committees. And because I am from Wichita and live south of Wichita, I'm a board of governor for the Wichita chapter of the Institute of Internal Auditors. Our proposed plan this year is the first two are to complete last year's carryover. And for the hotline, we're going to do an awareness program because we've had it in place and not had very many calls. And I think it's just because awareness. So we have an awareness program this year. We're going to continue to get ready for the HLC comprehensive review, the risk assessment, admissions and financial aid. We believe there's some work to be done there. The management action cadence. And then by the end of the year, we'll need another conflict of interest review. Okay, the clicker's not. That's a good one. Any questions?
Any questions for Tammy? Yes, Regent Winter.
Good morning, Tammy.
Good morning.
What do you consider to be most significant risk? That's financial risk, reporting risk facing the university in the years ahead? You understand my question? I'm trying to understand how you assess the risks, the financial risks, the audit risks in the future.
In the future, all risks are considered. Enterprise risk management looks at all of the risks because internal audit my work is comprised of operational, compliance, financial, and IT. And so when you put it all together, right now for universities and for all universities, the data shows us that cybersecurity is number one. Number two is talent management. And it goes on and on. The financial risks would be farther down into the ERM process. But of course, we always entertain any kind of new reporting that comes and from the CFO, from finance. So I don't have one big risk in finance to respond back to you with.
I heard you say that you consider this cyber security the biggest risk among all the audit risks. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment, and so do the universities across the country. North Carolina has followed them, the risk for, I think, 7 years, and they work with Protiviti, and they produce an excellent report every year that gives us the risk with a 10-year outlook. And 10 years from now, cybersecurity is still number one. So it's very interesting to watch.
Thank you.
Have you considered, I'm assuming, Regent,
Oh, yeah.
have you also considered AI, elements of AI in combination?
We have, and I read about it almost daily in the Institute of Internal Auditors, and it's a discussion and webinars, and all the vendors now are trying to sell us, the auditors, the software for it. But yes, I think it's fascinating, and we need to keep our eye on it.
Okay. I also meant to say the threat of AI.
Oh yes, the threat of AI. but we're looking at how can we use AI in audit
Yes.
to defend against those threats.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Happy to know.
thank you.
Tammy, just out of curiosity, and this is probably a question Regent Prasker could answer as well. You mentioned the ISO search was a failed search and now it will be a CISO. What is the difference between the two? What is a CISO?
Well, an ISO is an information security officer that reports to a CIO.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the tradition, the old school, if you will. And it depends on how big you are too. But a CISO is a chief information security officer that reports more at the same level because a CISO has to respond to cybersecurity threats and they can't be encumbered by someone saying, no, you can't go talk about that. And so we are switching our view to a CISO and going with that position. They
So
are
you-
hard to find, as you know, right now. So we've upped our game.
And that also gives them the authority to, be at the level that reports these issues. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions for Tammy this morning? All right, great information. Thank you so much. All right. We will now review State University's annual financial reports, including the composite financial index and current year budget outlook. And first up from Wichita State University, Tony Brune. Troy Brune, pardon me. I left my reading glasses, so I apologize.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here today and giving you an overview, a brief overview of the Composite Financial Index. I have 3 goals for my presentation. You can let me know how I did when I'm done. I leave here and you have a better understanding of what CFI is. You also have a understanding of what the limitations are and a higher level of comfort in your reliance on the actual CFI itself. CFI has been around for more than 4 decades. It is a benchmarking tool. It indicates the financial health of an institution. And it's not just the institution itself. It also uses financial data from all component units, including each university's foundation. And the data is taken from audited financial statements. At the end of the presentation, I'll try to present CFI as a student's GPA. So what precedes the CFI? CFI is kind of the end of the line. That's kind of like me at the end of the year, taking the financial statements, doing the calculations, but there's a lot of work that starts before that. At the board level and senior management, it's the strategic planning and the direction of each institution. In the middle, Tammy nailed it. She called it enterprise risk management, institution risk management. There's a ton of risks out there, and most of them are not financial. Compliance, regulatory, political, market, cybersecurity, of course, and the list goes on and on. And then there's underneath that, then you do the strategic financial analysis. And one way is calculating the CFI, and it's a way for that information to be passed up and communicated to the board level and also senior management. It gives you an indicator of the institution's health. CFI is made up of 4 different ratios. And I won't bore you with the calculations, but on slides 5 through 8, if you want, you can see what I do in the office to come up with the CFI. But at your level, you are wanting to know, as an indication, the financial health of each institution. So each ratio is calculated with raw data. It's divided by a strength factor and multiplied by the weight. All institutions of higher ed do this, Kansas, all over the country. Anything less than 3 may indicate some additional questions need to be asked. Before I jump into this, got too excited. I want to go over some limitations of the CFI. I feel it oversimplifies the financial data of institutions. Prior to coming to higher ed, I spent 22 years in local government. And higher ed finance is way more complicated than local government. There's so many things going on there. And to come up with one number at the end of the year, I think just oversimplifies what is really going on at each institution. And the CFI only focuses on financial metrics. It doesn't even refer to the quality of the academic programs, student services, or the institutional mission. It is strictly financial. And it's also should not be used as some type of early warning system because the data that you're receiving this month is from June 30th. It's 8 months old. So it's not an indicator, and it certainly doesn't have much predictive power. CFI should be used in a trend because a number by itself doesn't give you much information. And knowing why each ratio that makes up the CFI changed will give you more information on what is actually going on.
Regent Benson, are we allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely.
I didn't want it to
No,
go
no,
too
go ahead.
far. So on this graph, I see 2 points at which we were below 3.
CFI as a total on this slide is Wichita State's CFI from fiscal 09 through 23. The green is the CFI.
Yeah,
The
right.
4 lines below are the individual ratios that make up the CFI.
Agreed.
So when I commented on anything below 3 might cause some additional questions, I'm just talking about the CFI itself.
Right. That's the
And-
green line.
Yes, let me tell you Wichita State story just
Yeah.
by looking at the CFI.
I just wanted to understand because we have history on that.
So at the end of 2011, WSU CFI was 6.0, which would indicate financial healthy
Strong.
institution. Dr. Bardo came into town with a vision of an innovation campus and growing research and completely changing the university. As you can see, over the next 4 years, ending in FY15, university's CFI was 1.5.
Mm.
Now, if it was 1.5 and the university wasn't doing anything, that would be concerned. But the 1.5 was in an analysis based on what the university was doing. They were using their financial resources to invest in a business park innovation campus. As you can see, it paid off. After that, the CFI has rebounded. So the university took its reserves, idle cash, its financial health, and invested it. And as a point, from the end of 2019 through 23, the expenses in research at the university has more than tripled, far exceeding the national trends in research expenses. So I came at the end, or just when we were doing the financial statements in 2015. I didn't have all the information that went on before that, and I was like, what am I doing? But anyway, so that is the story of which.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing. And so when I had a visit to WSU, I, experienced the investment and it's fabulous. It's truly probably very progressive. Are we considering any additional determining factors? I think you pointed multiple times, this is only financial data. It's not the data. If we didn't invest it in this kind of technology, 6 may not be a constant, right? So it could be some things that we have invested looking at future that has saved us and probably not got us down to.
And
Is that safe to say, is what I'm trying to ask?
yes, and the CFI is not the only financial indicator.
Correct.
This is one.
One of
It's
them.
not the end all be all. It's one. It's to give you a level of, oh, do I need to ask questions? Should I dig in a little bit? It's just a indicator.
Indicator. Thank you.
So they're trying to simplify that complex environment into one. And I mentioned at the beginning that the CFI includes component units of each institution. In the foundation has a huge impact on the movement of the CFI from year to year. When the foundation's endowment and investments have a good year, you can assume that that will cause the CFI to increase a little bit. So down on the bottom is return on net assets, where most of that happens in the foundation. And you can see that the CFI closely mirrors the return on net assets. And this gives you an idea, if you see a CFI number, what the organization might consider. So on each level of the CFI from -4 to 10, is something for you to look at. Final thoughts on CFI. It's best to measure over a period of time and against the institution itself. It's less useful comparing to peers. Each institution is different. They have a different mission, a plan, strategy. And if you understand the ratios that make up the CFI and why they change, you'll be able to understand the story, the financial story of the institution better. And again, CFI only measures financial related and has to be analyzed in context with a lot of other ratios and information to assess the overall health. CFI's GPA. On this, on the left side, I have students 1 through 6. Each are taking 5 classes, 3 credit classes. I've highlighted student 1 and 3. If you're just looking at GPA, you would think student 1 is the best student. When you look at the underlying data, the underlying information that makes up the GPA, there is an issue in one of the classes. And that's just an indication to ask questions. What's going on? It could be lots of different things, from personal reasons, family reasons, instructor reasons. So that's an example of the CFI looking at the individual ratios and their changes to maybe ask some more questions. And that is the end of my overview. Hopefully you have a better understanding of CFI, its limitations, and your confidence in relying on it because it comes from audited numbers.
Great information. Vice President Frisbee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to add a little context for why we asked Troy to come up from Wichita to help us with the CFI explanation. The CFI is one tool that we offer to the regents when we talk about the ongoing financial health and well-being of our universities. And you'll see that echoed in the materials that 3 of our schools will present today. Well, this conversation will then carry on into March, where the next 3 will also present their information. I can tell you, if you have interest, I can give you all the detail of how their CFI, all the financial data that went into creating their composite index. And I have the full history. If you have interest for that, I can certainly provide that.
I anticipate we will. All right. Any other questions for Troy?
I just have one question. Do you use a tool? Or is it an Excel?
Excel, which is the
A
only
tool.
tool.
The only tool.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you again, Troy. Great information. All right. Next up from Pittsburgh State University, Doug Ball. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. As we get started, I also wanted to share, I know I'd shared last week that the university had selected Jamie Dalton to be our new internal auditor. Jamie was able to join us today, and so I just wanted to recognize her and tell you how excited we are to have her moving into that role. She'll be transitioning in over a few months. It'll be kind of a gradual transition, but hope to have her.
Yeah. Congratulations, Jamie.
All right, in terms of our mid-year update, I've got really 3 topics that I want to highlight in particular, and then some other reference data that I've brought as well. And so some of this I'll plan to walk through relatively quickly, but please stop me at any point if you want to ask a question or dive a little bit deeper. Let's start with just a little bit of kind of setting the table data, right? This is enrollment data that you would have seen as we announced fall enrollment. So this is not new information, but just as a reminder. Really a little bit of a change in trend happened this fall, right? We saw our FTE numbers up slightly. That's the first time that had happened in a number of years. So a real positive there. And you may remember the story from this fall, really two primary drivers of that, two areas of strength. One was freshman enrollment up for the third consecutive year, not large increases, but 3 consecutive increases. So that's impactful. And then also international is probably maybe the biggest impact. Continued to see a good and notable recovery from the lows of the COVID timeframe. And so saw some good progress there. The next page is the credit hour production. And so this doesn't yet include the current fiscal year, the current fall. And so what we're seeing there is that trend over several years, which really aligns with the headcount and the FTE changes as well. The one thing that might catch your attention there is that online and hybrid section of the bar that's smaller this year than in prior years. That's predominantly a function of COVID and the pandemic, right? The modified class delivery approaches that happened during the 2 years most impacted by COVID, kind of returning to a more typical and maybe longer term expectation for what that makeup will be. Next page highlights our 2 largest revenue streams and the trends over a longer period of time, over about a 15-year period of time. I'll really highlight 2 things here, starting kind of at the bottom. That gray bar at the very bottom is the tuition line. And the notable thing there is that it's going to inch up this year, again, for the first time in several years. Really aligns with those enrollment numbers we talked about a few minutes ago. And so that's certainly a positive development and one we hope to build on. And then we'll also note the state appropriation lines. That's that middle line is the actual state appropriations. We've certainly been thankful and appreciative of the additional funding that the legislature and governor have supported. So that's a positive step in a positive direction, but still a gap to that top line. That top line is the number that state appropriations would have been if it had kept up with inflation over this same time period. So there's still a material gap there, but a little bit of closing of the gap over the last couple of years. Certainly we're hopeful we'll see another step in that direction this coming year. All right, now the 3 things that I really wanted to call attention to. This schedule is the first of those. This schedule is looking at the current year. So we're halfway through the current year as of December 31st. And really the question we're trying to answer here is, are we on track to hit our budget? So this is focusing on the general use budget. That's kind of the core budget that drives the academic and administrative operations of the institution. You know, and the short version is we're very much on track to hit our budget this year. But let me just dive a little bit deeper. That first number I've circled is total revenue. So at the halfway point of the year, we're at 51% in terms of total revenue. So a little bit ahead of where you might expect to be. Notice the tuition line right above that. We're at 52% for tuition. We typically at the midpoint in the year see 48, 49, 50%. That would be a kind of a normal year, just slightly ahead of schedule due to the stronger than expected enrollment results in the fall. And then down on the expense side, really nothing too noteworthy on the expense side. Again, a typical year, we tend to see anywhere from 46 to 49% of our total budget spent through December 31st. We're in that range, but on the low end of that range. So again, both of these lead me to believe in all the underlying data that we're very much on track to hit, if not maybe slightly exceed our budget for the year. Next page, the second thing that I really wanted to call attention to are a couple of different comparisons of our tuition rates. This is total tuition and fees for undergraduates compared to peer institutions. And of course, this past year, you'll remember we did have a tuition increase, a larger tuition increase compared to what we've had over the last 5 years or so. And so it was important to me and interesting to me to see if that really changed in any significant way our relative standing relative to peers. And again, the short answer is it didn't. We saw comparable or similar levels of changes across many of our peer institutions. And so we really didn't move in any kind of significant way. Just as a reminder, the top half is our direct peers. We're lower than 4 of the 5 peers. The only exception to that is Valdosta State. We talked about Valdosta State last year. Georgia made a very significant investment in higher education a year ago. And as a result of that, all of the state institutions in the state of Georgia reduced their tuition levels. So that caused them to drop below us a year ago, and they've stayed in basically the same position this year. They're the one exception there. And then the bottom graph are the aspirational peers. So these are slightly larger institutions for the most part. And again, we're lower than 4 of the 5 and then basically equivalent to 1 of the 5 there.
Do we see a potential in increase if that's the case, or are we concerned about increasing too much and losing students?
Yeah, I think that's very much a balancing act. And so, it's a little early in the cycle to be thinking about tuition, but as we've started some preliminary thinkings, I certainly would not expect we would anticipate bringing forward something as large as the increase we did this past year. That's kind of on the high end of the range, but we're much more of a mindset of maybe a slow and steady increase is the path to go, rather than big swings from year to year. So that's the initial thinking. All right, the next page is a secondary comparison we like to do as well. This is comparing to the institutions in our athletic conference. So these institutions are geographically much closer than that prior page, but not necessarily as similar in mission or programs that they have. And again, we're really in a similar spot to what we've been for a number of years. We tend to be in that middle group there where a bunch of institutions are at a very similar level, but generally at the bottom end of that middle group. And again, we didn't see any significant movement in this over the last year. There was a switch for one institution. Rogers State, which is the institution just to the right of us, was slightly higher than us a year ago. They're slightly lower than us this year. That's about the only material swing we had in terms of our positioning relative to others. All right, and then the third thing I really wanted to call attention to will build on Troy's comments about CFI. And so this shows you Pittsburgh State's CFI over a number of years. The left-hand graph is the actual CFI metric. So you see it's up slightly this year from where it was a year ago. It sets at right around 4.5. So that's kind of firmly in the middle of the range that I consider a good target for us, a place we'd like to be most of the time, certainly expecting it to swing from time to time. And I think the thing maybe most interesting about the results this year is there wasn't any big factor that was driving the results in a significant way like there has been the last couple of years. Troy, in fact, mentioned the impact that foundation returns can have on your CFI metric. That's certainly true for us as well. If you look at the last couple of years, the big jump up in 21 and then the big decline in 22, both of those were heavily driven by significantly high and then significantly low foundation returns over those 2 years. Those returns moderated in fiscal year 23. They were pretty typical, about 7%. So typical to what we've seen over the long run. And there really weren't any other significant factors that drove anything unusual in this year's result. So kind of steady as you go, as you might say. As I look at the longer term trend, right, look over 4, 5, 6 years, right, steady increase, steady growth in the CFI metric over that time frame. That's really driven by debt reduction, right? We've refinanced some debt. We've had some debt finish up and get paid off, as well as just being disciplined about managing our finances and living within our means.
Doug, the big dip in fiscal year 2016, would that have been affected by the Bicknell Center, the Plaster Center, Block 20? I know you had a lot of big
all
projects.
of those things. Yeah, exactly. It's similar to the example that Troy mentioned as well. At a time when you make a big investment in a project or several projects, that can have a temporary impact on your CFI. And that was exactly the time frame all of those projects were happening, as well as a big student center project as well. And so all of those did result in a little temporary dip there.
You probably had $60, $70 million in projects over a couple of years.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, and then the last several pages are really just some reference material that I'll probably go through fairly quickly. Debt service really hasn't changed from a year ago. It's nothing significant. We did have some significant changes in 20 and 22 that helped pull down our go forward debt service requirements. The one thing I will mention is Moody's recently completed their periodic review and update of our financial status, and in doing so, they affirmed our bond rating at the same that it's been for several years now. Page 10 just shows an all fund, kind of a comprehensive trend on expenditures. Frankly, nothing particularly noteworthy that I wanted to call attention to here. So there for your reference. Page 11 shows the breakup or the makeup of our different revenue sources. Again, looking at all funds across the institution. And again, not any significant changes here, just remind you that tuition and fees and state appropriations continue to be the two big buckets. But the growing bucket there are the grant and contracts. There are two slices of the pie related to grants and contracts. You're going to hear a presentation later today in the full board meeting about research activity at Pittsburgh State, and that's a growing area for us. So you'll learn more about that later. And then, of course, auxiliary enterprises is another meaningful slice of the pie. Page 12 shows a breakup of the expenditures. This almost rarely changes from year to year, but I like to include it just to remind you how heavily weighted we are to compensation and benefits, right? Our people are what we are. It's a big part of our expenditures. It's almost 60% if you look at all funds, but I think even more relevant if I narrow down to general use funds. So again, academic and administrative activities, it's nearly 80% of our expenditures. It's held pretty tightly at those levels most years. All right, so finally, I'll just wrap up with a few thoughts looking forward, right? As I think about risk factors that we're actively paying attention to and managing, from a financial point of view, the two things that rise to the top of the list for me are enrollment trends and inflation. Those are the same two things that I mentioned a year ago. They are, in fact, the same two things that I was concerned about a year ago. But I'll tell you, I feel a lot better today than I did a year ago. I think we're seeing progress both in the external environment, but also in some of the actions we've been taking and the results of those actions over the last year. I think we're on a good path towards addressing both of those items, but we'll continue to need to focus on those things. So things like the student success initiatives, that's starting to show some benefits. Hopefully we'll see those benefits continuing. Our new enrollment management leader is taking a deep look at our financial aid and scholarship strategy, going to make some tweaks and adjustments to optimize that and hopefully have a bigger impact on our enrollment trends from that. And then obviously we've got the big Guerrilla Rising project that's in the works, and we think will have a material impact on both the community and the institution. Questions do you have?
Questions for Doug? Yes, Regent Winter.
Doug, other than the obvious astute management decisions by the chief financial officer, to what do you attribute the modest but real gains in enrollment?
Yeah, you know, I think there's been a real focus over the last couple of years on stepping back and evaluating all of the different things we do around identifying, focusing on, attracting, and retaining students. And so we're seeing, you know, everything from program evaluations and adjustments to recruiting strategies to, as I mentioned a minute ago, really digging into scholarshiping strategies right now. I think all of those things have contributed in a meaningful way, and it's the combination of all of them.
Good. It's great to see it.
Doug, you referenced the growth in grants and, you know, external type funds. I know during the pandemic, there was a lot of federal money flowing. You know, the federal government's just trying to get money back in the system, and I know a lot of those were geared toward education. What impact did that have on your growth of grants and external funds? And are you concerned that the further we get away from the pandemic, that that could go back down?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would really kind of break our grant activity into maybe two subsets. There was certainly a subset that was specifically related to the pandemic, right? The CARES funds related to responding to the pandemic, and maybe a number of other related things. And so that was very much a bubble that happened mainly in 21 and 22. Really don't see as much of that in those 23 numbers, as they'd really kind of exhausted themselves by 23. And so that piece was a bubble. You know, the underlying areas of research and focus for our institution. So the polymer work that we do at the NEMA organization, or the reading center work that we're growing and expanding now. We think those continue to have growth opportunities going into the future. And
Good.
that's exactly what you'll hear about this afternoon.
Okay, good. All right. Any other questions for Doug? All right. Thanks so much, Doug. Next up, from Wichita State University, Werner. Yeah. The old college radio days. I can't get rid of them.
Good morning, Regents. I'm joined by Troy Bruin, who you met earlier, and also David Miller, our former Executive Director of Budget. He's moving over to the Division of Industry and Defense Program. So my loss, but we are fortunate that he's staying at the institution, will continue to help us. He's done a magnificent job, so I want to publicly thank him for his work that he's done 8 years, 7 with me. So start. I'm going to start with going right into where we are this year with a midpoint of December 31st. We do our state general fund. I have it dissected there a little bit and displayed a little differently than Doug did. We get our receive our funds at the beginning of the year, so we just count 100% there. I could just cut it in half and we'd have the same, essentially the same chart, but wanted to point that out. Moving down to general fees, revenue. Yes, sir. That comes as we get it. So that's a little different than the other, which were apportionments. Revenue. You can see general, that's tuition. We're close to expected, and I'll discuss a little bit more about that. Cash, we put $2.1 million, and we use our cash balance for one-time investments. And so, for example, for $950,000 for our campus master plan, $565,000 for purchasing and implementation of an HR management talent system, $175,000 for equipment for expansion of our physical therapy program, which is under works, $175,000 for university website refresh. So we're using our resources to advance our institution in that fashion. Going down by program, budget by program, no real surprises there. Those percentages that are either above or below 50%, most of that is depending on the time and when we purchase. If you have a large purchase, for example, and it's a one-time purchase during the year, and if it's in fall, it shows up here. If it's not, it could look like our budget is underweighted. Moving on to our actual operating expenses by program classification. Just want to, I'm sorry. Just want to note that I'm just going to highlight a few of the expenses that have either high dollar or high percentage change. For example, instruction changed significantly, $6 million. That was an increase due to hiring additional faculty. Research, this is always growing, as you can see by the trend there, 77 million, 96, 130, 177, 241, grew by $64 million or 36.3%. And that continued growth is just supporting DoD's digital twin, aircraft sustainment efforts, as well as works, repair, and operations center. So all those things that we are embarking upon on the research side. Operations and maintenance of plant, we had a pretty significant change there, $9.8 million. And that primary driver is an increase in spending that we're doing on maintenance efforts. Scholarship and fellowships, is a pretty significant drop, and that decrease was due to the one-time federal COVID relief funding for students being received the prior fiscal year. So all of a sudden that disappears and that number has gone down. So that's the HERF money that we received. On this page, you will see my infamous scissors chart. Unfortunately, as I said in the past, it's the story that this chart tells isn't about scissors, but displays the stark reality that as state funding has declined, tuition has needed to be increased, putting the burden on the backs of our students and their families. We have seen a little bit uptick the last 2 years as state investment has happened as opposed to disinvestment or no investment. We have a little hook on the end there, so you can see that that's a positive thing, and it'd be nice for that to continue. Enrollment. The top line of the chart is headcount. And so we had an increase last year from, this is fall numbers, fall of 22 to fall of 23 of 3.7% or 627 students. So we're happy for that. The vertical bar graphs that you see below that show FTE. And if we look at 2023, you'll see for the fall of 2023, we had a slight decrease of 56, or less than 0.5% in our FTE. The top gray bar is a little concerning. That's our international student. We had a decline of 289, or 17%. The black portion, which is our non-resident, that increased 59 FTE, or 3.7%. And the yellow portion is our resident students, which increased 183 FTE, or 2.2%. And this is really important for us as a state, I think, and as an institution. It looks like we've at least stopped the decline. You can see the yellow bar has declined slowly, but declined, and hopefully this has stopped and reverse a trend. And I think retention efforts, some of the resources we've put towards retention. We don't have our final numbers for fall, or excuse me, for spring, the 20-day numbers. We probably will we're going to have a little blip for fall to spring, focusing on a specific area, and that in fall of 2022, we had a really large incoming class of graduate international students. It was unusually large, and they graduate this fall, this December, and so we'll see that decrease. And we weren't able to keep up with that huge influx that happened in 2022 to a variety of reasons, but we believe that we'll be back to a sustainable level by fall of 2025. In the meantime, this drop of international grad students, because of the credit value, will affect our tuition budget. So as we go into 2025, we'll be adjusting that accordingly. I'd like to end this slide on a positive note, and I think this is really good to hear from our institution. It might be the same as well, that the monies we've received have really helped. We started the student success persistence initiatives, and so our fall to fall retention increased 2.8%, and particularly noteworthy is our underserved students. The retention increased 3.3%, and that's what those monies and resources were for. So we're hoping we can continue to receive those. This chart is interesting in the fact that you can see that how the credit hour mix has changed. That's our traditional classroom credit hours, the yellow bar. Online, the black part of the vertical bar. And in 2014, we were about 11%. In 2023, we're at 36%. And much like Doug said, we saw that increase certainly during the pandemic. And I think we were all curious what would happen post-pandemic. And so for us, it's remained about the same, 36, 37%. And you'll also notice that for enrollment in general, from 22 to 23, we were up 9,446 credit hours, or a modest increase of 2.8%. So one of the things that we embarked upon many years ago was a Shocker City and Shocker Select. So if you look at the key, you see Shocker City, or the black areas, and of course Kansas. And so the yellow state of Kansas with the wonderful Woo in the middle there, and all the black areas, those are Shocker City areas. And so students or potential students from that area pay in-state tuition. That's about 45 million people that qualify for in-state tuition. The green area is Shocker Select, and they pay 150% of in-state tuition. So those two together amount to about 69 million, just short of 69 million people. The effect of that Shocker City enrollment, this chart really shows the success of the Strategic Enrollment Management Plan, of which Shocker City and Shocker Select strategies, formerly called I-35 Corridor Strategy, have accomplished. You can see from 22 to 23, we had a nice increase of about 68 students, approximately 5%. The added bonus of these students coming in is that they live in residence halls, because these are students from Dallas-Fort Worth. They may be from Houston. We have our freshmen required to live in a residence hall, so that's been really helpful. And you can see the really uptick started in 2016, 2017, when we started. First was Dallas-Fort Worth area Metroplex, Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and then Kansas City, Missouri side. Shortly thereafter, in 2018, it was Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Waco, Denver, and St. Louis. And so you can see as we've added the areas, we've increased enrollment from those areas. It's been very successful. We have a lot of students from those areas, and many of them, we have a high persistence rate because, again, applied learning opportunities and internships, that they stay in the state. And that's what we're trying to do as we bring these students in, is that they stay here. K-Board recently approved a new peer institution set. And so this change was better to reflect the urban-based research university peers that you can see there: Memphis, UNO, UT Austin. And so as you can see among our peer set, we're very nicely priced. The other thing I typically put up is a comparison to, this chart compares what I would consider our competitive institutions for students. This are the institutional cross apps, potential students that tell us they're interested in other institutions. And as you can see, we're the lowest cost among those. I say this every year, but I always want to point this out because I think it's very interesting. Is it noteworthy are the two Oklahoma institutions. If you look at Oklahoma State and University of Oklahoma, for example, University of Oklahoma can certainly brag about their low tuition, but you can see that they're considerably more expensive when you include the mandatory fees, those fees that you have to pay to be there. You've seen our chart before, but as you can see, the chart on the right is our composite, our CFI. And at 3.17, it stayed pretty much in the range, what I would consider our normal range. In 2015, to your point, Regent Passager, is that we actually were investing in ourselves. And one of the things that happens that was significant is a $60 million investment in Shocker Hall. So those type of things, as Regent Benson, you pointed out with Pittsburgh State, that these investments actually will show up on our CFI as well. And the 5.05, as Troy mentioned, that was our a peak due to our foundation net assets growing. Primary reserve, we had slight decrease in both of those. Viability reserve in particular decreased slightly due to issuance of debt. So the debt issuance we've had in the last couple of years, in July of 2020, we had the Woolsey Hall Flats and Suites at 72 million. Fiscal year 22, which was July of 21, 13.2 million in our Darth building, and most recently Clinton Hall renovation in fiscal year 23, which is now called our Student Success Center. And this is our overall debt picture. You can see it's declined somewhat as we've retired some debt. And I would say housing is the large component of that, and that's made encompassed by Shocker Hall, and also the issuance of flats and suites, the debt we had there. So housing does pay for the housing debt. And I stand for any questions.
All right, any questions for Werner? Yeah, Regent Dykes, you want to turn your mic on.
The Oklahoma thing, is that like Truth in Advertising? Yeah, on their tuition, what's their
Well,
game plan there?
It's interesting because one of David's team members actually researches that every year. And when I saw that number, I said, what is going on here? And those are actually the numbers that show up. They actually have held their tuition flat, but increased their fees.
There a comparison thing from universities that they stand out to prospective students?
Yeah,
Yeah, and then hit them on the other side with the fees. I mean, it just
I'm not sure how
interesting
they,
advertising.
I'm not sure how they play that game, but it would be very interesting to see, especially as prospective families and students. Of course, University of Oklahoma being a flagship probably has a different challenge than there's more opportunities in many institutions with a number of students that are interested. But yeah, I would find it very interesting that if I was a prospective family and prospective student and their family, what's going on here.
Well, and especially since you recruit a lot of students from that area, would certainly encourage you to use that in marketing materials or some way to make sure that students are aware of that.
Thank you.
Question, Regent Prasker?
Yes, I guess I have two questions. I first wanted to understand, probably this may go to Elaine more than, I understand from the previous presentation, going below 3 is something that we need to be cautious about. But are we aiming for a certain number to be at?
That's a very good question, Regent Prasker, and my short answer would be no. When these CFI data were first collected years prior to my arriving here in 2014, there was one sheet and everybody's information for all 6 universities was on one page so that you could easily look at Wichita State and Pittsburgh State together. And that struck me as not the best strategy because they're two completely different institutions, different situations. So we've separated those onto separate pages. For one thing. And the most important part to me would be the region seeing the trend and clearly being able to see the correlation between investments, either in new programs on the academic side or facilities or student services and where you're investing that. And then is it paying off? So you have to look, as Troy mentioned, over time and think about all the other things that play for that university.
Okay.
So it's a big story to tell, trying to distill into one number. So there
Absolutely.
is no absolute goal. The other piece of it, though, I would say there are some guidance figures noted, like your total debt ratio. You wouldn't want that to grow over a certain level. And so when we do display the entirety of information, we do note that as well.
Yeah.
As well as the university's bond ratings, because that's another way of measuring how an external entity would be looking at their financial information in their campus.
Thank you. That's very useful. My next question is, we are looking at 3 point, like really, good investment done, and then we go down in the CFI index. Are you basing your future decisions on any of the information here? I would say probably, but at the same time, how much of that importance falls on your president's shoulder looking at this information? Can you?
Can't speak for our president, but I would say that obviously before embarking upon any significant investment, for example, it could drop your CFI, but that would be a consideration that you would look at. If you were borrowing $100 million, for example, it would affect our CFI, but maybe that $100 million is a very good investment for the future of the institution. So, and you never really know what that one specific thing does, because that could drop your CFI and then the foundation has a fantastic return year and it'd be offsetting. And so there are all these things that go into that comprehensive number. But I think if you're just trying to look at CFI and move that one way or another, you're going to have some challenge because you just can't control all the factors. But I think it's important to weigh those in consideration.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Any other questions for Werner this morning?
If I may,
Vice
Mr.
President
Chairman.
Bisbee, yes, sir.
Thank you. Werner, you might mention, you alluded to it somewhat with your graduate enrollment figures, but there was a recent news story that came out about a $2 million budget issue for the graduate school. You might talk a little bit more specifically about that.
Yep. So I can cover some of that. So basically what happened in the year 2022, we really, we had a large class that came into our engineering program. And that was about 1,000 students, far greater than we've ever had in any kind of program like that. And that was in the School of Computing within the College of Engineering. And so those students have graduated, they will graduate. That's the challenge with a graduate student. They typically aren't there for 4 years. It's 18 months or 2 years, depending on the program. And so those students are graduating and we haven't replaced them at the numbers that they're graduating. And so that is a challenge. On top of the other challenge, which I showed, is that in general, our international students are down. So the value of international students and graduate students on a credit hour basis is higher than, for example, resident. They pay more. So it's 150% or 230% of tuition. And so the value of a credit hour for those students is higher too. So in translating that, we we don't have our 20th day numbers to see where our fall to spring enrollment is, but we put out about $2 million shortfall on budget versus where we made the actual. But if you look at the first thing I showed, it looks like tuition is about at 53%, which is pretty normal for our fall to spring. So we'll be working on that. We have a plan in place to try to increase international students, and we will be at a more sustainable level by fall of 2025. But the succinct dollar amount could be 2.1 million, could be less than that, could be significantly more, depending on what happens our fall to spring. But we've already, we have a tuition revenue consensus team that gets together once we find out our 20th day numbers, and we start working graduate, international, resident, non-resident. We look at all those things, and that will be the basis for forming the fiscal year 25 budget.
Any other questions for Warner? All right, thanks so much, Warner. And now from the University of Kansas, Jeff DeWitt. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. About 3 years ago, I had been here 2 days and had to do this presentation. So at least I have a little bit more experience under my belt at the University of Kansas now. So I'll walk you through similar to the information you just saw from the other two schools. And I'm going to really walk you through our structure because we're a bit complex because of the medical center, KUMC, and us together. And the financial statements that we're reporting on are combined for everything. So this is the medical center, the University of Kansas together, all our campuses, all our affiliates and auxiliaries, athletics, endowment. It's all combined together. I'll give you a mid-year update like you saw for the other ones on the two campuses. Talk about our enrollment, particularly our first-time freshmen, our student credit hour growth, which was unprecedented last year, and I'll talk about that a bit. The cost of state general fund and tuition, our fee comparisons like you saw before, where we are in our general use budget for both campuses, what our expenditures look like, talk about our debt service and our CFI that you've been hearing from all the others. And then I'm also going to close on some of the fiscal challenges and their actions we're taking to address some of those as we've talked about before. Just to remind you, we're really one university, University of Kansas, and that's a big initiative by the chancellor to bring us more together, more collaborative, share costs, et cetera. But there's a Lawrence Edwards campus and the Center for Research there, the Memorial Union and Kansas Athletics, and then the Medical Center. And then we have endowment, University of Kansas Health System, which, you know, the Cancer Center is being done jointly with the Medical Center and the health system. And then the University of Kansas physicians are kind of our structure. Mid-year updates, we had the largest freshman class in history of 5,259 on the Lawrence campus. Our applications are running actually with that and actually ahead of that so far. But we're kind of blind because of the FAFSA delay. So we don't know what's really real or not real. And we're all struggling with that. But we're actually running actually ahead of last year so far. We just, again, don't know what's going to stick. Our general use budget and 5-year financial plan are managed through several strategic initiatives to balance particularly the Lawrence campus, and I'll show that, and how we're using our reserves. Campus master plan is completed, so we now have a big picture of where we want to go in the long run. And the infrastructure and the 11th Mississippi Gateway project is under construction, as you all see. You can watch the cameras if you want. We may get advertising out there and, you know, get some money off all the hits we're having people watching the tear down and build up of that stadium. But the point I want to make there, because this is often an urban myth that gets out there, this is funded by ARPA dollars, donor money, and athletics. There's no general use money. The university is not paying to build the stadium. It's being self-funded by revenues that will come out of the stadium, donors, and money that the Department of Commerce has allocated to us, and challenge grants and ARPA grants. Medical Center enrollment remains steady. Research enterprise continues strong growth, particularly in some of the areas like cancer that we're talking about. There's a new Wichita campus being built jointly with Wichita State. Cancer center being built. We had a 7 a.m. meeting this morning on that project, so that's moving forward very aggressively. Brain health, and then they're working on a 5-year forecasting tool with Workday that they have on their campus as well. The university, we have the largest full-time equivalent enrollment since 2010. So that really strong freshman growth, as you can see, has caused that chart to continue to go up. Notice the yellow bar, which is out of state. So we are being have been very successful in the last year of in attracting out-of-state students, which is a big benefit to the university. And there's been a lot of effort on our strategic enrollment plan to target that area. And as was mentioned by Wichita State, and get them to stay here, right? So have them contribute to the economy. So this is a big effort that we have going on at the University of Kansas. That one is, I think even shocked us as we scrambled to find housing, as you all were aware and helped us with. And if we're going to have that class again, you'll see in next month's agenda, we'll be bringing forward some leases and some housing rates and some other strategies at the next agenda to handle that class if we get it again, and maybe even a little bit more if we have to. So again, really, we have monthly strategic enrollment meetings. We have a whole series of strategies we tried. We didn't expect them all to work. And then when they did, we had to find housing for them. And the point later I'll speak about is that looks really healthy. And then when you look at student enrollment numbers, but when you grow that big, that fast, you have to deal with the cost of housing and student advisors and extra instructors and where, depending on where they're going. So growth isn't free, but I'd rather have growth than not have growth. So it's a good problem to have. And you really have to focus on your net tuition revenue, because you can scholarship yourself into liquidity if you have people come and you can't afford, you're not getting enough revenue out of it. So we focus really, really heavily on the net tuition revenue for that as well. This is as Warner said, the scissor chart. This just shows you how, if you go back, way back to, I think it's 2000 there, you can see state funding percentage versus tuition funding. And now, and I want to thank the governor and I want to thank the Board of Regents for your efforts to get a budget in the last 2 years, because you can see that moving closer together. And that's helpful to us and helpful to the students in keeping tuition affordable. This is how we compare to our peers. We are 1.5 years ago, creeping way up on the top of that chart. And I think holding tuition steady for 5 years and had our first increase last year has put us in the place where we should be. We want to be competitive there. That's part of your enrollment strategy, right? If you get too expensive, people will go somewhere else. And so that's where we kind of want to maintain ourselves. A lot of people have jumped over us in the last few years. We're kind of in the lower middle there on the Lawrence campus. This is just focusing on the bottom numbers. I wish I'd put a circle like was done for Pittsburgh State, but the number is we're about 50% of our revenue and about 47% of our expenses. So we're right on track for our budget. For the Lawrence campus and the medical campus is the same picture, around 50% of revenue, 47%. You'll see some percentages that are a little out of whack there because some things happened at the beginning of the year and some things happen later. So, but in total, we're on track, and we monitor this very closely on a monthly basis. This shows you over time in terms of our consolidated operating, where we are. We're about $1.5 billion in 2023. A lot of that growth is related to increases in salaries, 5% increase 2 years ago, 2.5% last year. And then the medical center stays pretty close up to the market on their increases. So that really is what's driving a lot of that increase is salaries, as you will see by this chart, which shows you compensation and benefits are 64% of our budget. You see the scholarships and fellowships at 2%. That's what the financial statements show, but what you don't see when you look at consolidated financial statements is endowment funding coming in. And then you see direct scholarships, and that gets you in the 7% range if you include those funded from an external source that don't show up. If it goes directly to the student, it doesn't show up on the financial statement. So we have about $108 million a year we contribute to students to help pay their cost of attendance. One factor we monitor closely is we have a policy not to go over 7% of our expenditures to debt service. You can see we're well below that. And this is something we monitor closely, and is something that the rating agencies know that's our policy. So the issue is, that's kind of your credit card limit, 7%, but you got to be able to make the credit card payment. So you got to have net operating revenue to pay any new debt service. So we're well below our limit. So we have capacity. We just have to have the revenue to pay it if we do issue more debt. This is our CFI, and you can see the big spike a couple years ago, totally driven by endowment, really, really large returns, and pretty significant losses the next year, and this year they're kind of holding steady. But that's a healthy CFI in that range for us. But one thing, you all made some different comments and questions, and I'll just kind of add some flavor to this. And Troy said this earlier. This is one number to look at, but you might have a really healthy total, but you might have your housing struggling, or your union struggling, or your one campus is doing better than the other, or endowments covering up things that may be going on. My advice to all of you, because you kept asking the questions, there are universities out there that are in trouble today, and they were at one for a very, very long time. One is a really bad place to be. And so, I think you heard 3 or 2 or numbers like that. You should look at the trends, but the trends stay low. Like, we might make a really big investment in a research building or something and incur some debt for that, and it may drop. But we do a 5-year financial plan, and we forecast the CFI and all the ratios and all the liquidity and all the things that if you do that, you can't, if it goes low for a long time, you as Regents should, be beating us up pretty heavy. But if it goes down, we better explain why it's going down and where it's going to go in the long run. And so that's really, the advice from, I think, from all of us when we look at this.
Jeff,
And if you go back, way back, the medical center was having a lot of challenges many, many years ago, and that number was fairly low.
so how does like the 11th and Mississippi Gateway project, you said that there are no general funds from the university. Will that, you've got that, the cancer center, the medical center in Wichita.
So
I'm assuming that's gonna impact.
This is a consolidated metric. So athletics debt would show up in the metric. But I don't expect it to have much. It's $100 million, $115 million is what they'd be borrowing for, paid by athletics, paid by the stadium revenues. But that debt load would show up in this number. And on the medical center, we don't yet know if we'll even need debt. That's a thing we're looking at depending on the grant levels we get and the external funding they have. So we may not need any debt at that project. And on the Wichita site, that's, assuming everything works out legislatively, that's funded to not have to borrow for that one as well. So we would have, and in all those are all 3 investment, you're building for investment. There's a big return on a gateway project. There's a big return on a cancer center, but it's expensive operate. So if you drop them because you're issuing debt, the question is, what's going to happen? You're going to get more enrollment. You're going to get more research. So you kind of got to look at that. That's your expertise, but that's what you got to look at when you incur debt. What's going to happen with it in the long? Why are you doing it? What's the purpose of just to build and borrow? That's when those numbers get bad. If you don't have something on the other end. So this is one, I just want to remind you all that, again, the CFI is a total number. We are working through a structural deficit still at the Lawrence campus. And I just want to remind you of that and what we're doing to address it. But, the key fiscal challenges university-wide, and one concern we have is the reductions to the governor's budget. The governor's budget, I want to say thank you to the Board of Regents for putting the request into the governor. I want to thank the governor for proposing it. But if we take hits that we may be taking through some of the DEI discussions and some of the other sweeping for this or that, we assumed in our financial plan that we would get what we have in the governor's budget when we did our plan. And to have that reduced means we have to do something else that we're not doing, either more strategic initiatives or possibly budget reductions. And I think that goes for all of us. So the chancellor and I talked about this a couple days ago, is to remind everybody we need to do everything we can to, to support that budget, because it helps us get out of where we are and helps us get healthy. And we really need to protect that. Cybersecurity threats in a changing IT environment, we're continuing to invest more and more. We had a huge discussion on our cybersecurity insurance jointly earlier this month, and addressing that. Faculty, staff recruitment and retention, particularly our big researchers that are bringing in revenue to the university and, making students want to come here. We need to do what we can to retain them. And then faculty, facility upgrades and maintenance across all the campuses. Again, thank you to the state for the funding on deferred maintenance. It's helped a lot, but we have a a lot of deferred maintenance that we need to address and get our labs and our research places where we can recruit those high quality faculty. So you got to have good facilities to have good faculty to attract students. So all those are university-wide challenges both campuses address. On the Lawrence campus specific, the chart, the blue chart on the side is the one we showed you last year in the budget process. We took the COVID resources we had, we took the budget cuts we did 3 years ago, we took all the things we're doing to come up with a strategy to land and not have to do budget cuts, but that requires the structural deficit to be addressed through strategic initiatives that are going on, strategic enrollment working really well, right? Conferences and events, continuous improvement, a whole series of other things that we're doing to make sure we can get through that. And that might look bad, but there's a contingency fund under that. So this isn't like burning our cash down to zero. It's using it strategically to take the time to get these implemented. So, you know, the other challenges we have that we're working through is housing, which we have a strategy that we're kind of got executed last week that we'll be bringing to you to address our housing needs. And then we have a significant market pay study done for staff and admin. The medical center has done this several years ago, particularly on their staff and admin side. And we're working on a market gap for our faculty. Who do you compare to? What's the gap? How do you make sure you're paying to keep your top people there? And we're going to need to address that. So these strategic initiatives are not only meant to get us structurally balanced, but to provide funding for addressing faculty pay as we go forward to make sure we're competitive in the market. And then deferred maintenance is something we're all continuing to address. So the point of this is that the reason why the state budget is so important, that graph assumes that we get what we have and assumes that we continue forward with these initiatives. The chancellor and the provost and I on the Lawrence campus meet monthly to see where we are and everything. I monitor it at the end of every month to see where we are. We're right on track. We're right on track for that graph to go where it's supposed to go. And when it doesn't stay on track, then the chancellor and the provost and I will have some hard discussions. And going back to the question that was asked earlier about the president or the chancellor's, view of the annual financial statements, when those come out, we have a big 2-3 hour meeting and we walk through the CFI, we walk through what the financial statements say, and we walk through, where we are. So there's a considerable discussion. I think it's probably the chancellor's favorite meeting, and I can only say that because he's not here. No, it's not joyful, but it's necessary. So those are some things. And here's
Jeff,
Yeah.
sorry about, you're in a good flow. I just wanted to ensure for the cybersecurity part, do we have mandatory trainings or knowledge trainings for all employees?
so
on
we,
campus.
we have we do phishing attacks,
Right.
unscheduled. We have training on how to be safe. So there's a cybersecurity required training all employees have. So yes, we have
Okay.
that set up, and that's something relatively new.
And it's mandatory.
It's mandatory, yes. And it's been mandatory at the medical center for quite some time. It's now mandatory at the Lawrence campus as well. And we just are rolling out multi-factor authentication to students. That's
Absolutely.
just happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, because, they're a point of vulnerability as well. So there's lots of things going on in that area. But just to kind of go back to summarize what I was talking about, we have an enrollment and management initiative, student success initiative to improve retention, continuous improvement initiative for efficiencies. We're nearing completion of the market pay study. We're targeting investments in research and education buildings to make sure we can get those up to speed. That's a multi-year process. Increased collaboration on administrative functions on campuses. David and I and all the people on both campuses spent most of a day, and we were going to spend another day working to get those more collaborative and cooperative. Comprehensive financial and capital plans for the Memorial Union student housing are under development right now to make sure they stay viable and don't drag down the recovery of the Lawrence campus and the rest. And then continued implementation of conference and events, including a whole north end zone, which would be a conference center in the new facility, and getting that's a revenue enhancement. So those are the things we're doing. So that chart goes down and comes back up, and we monitor those very closely. And again, the three of us, the chancellor, provost, and I meet monthly to see where these are to make sure we're on track. So that's where we are in the University of Kansas. So any other questions?
Yes, Regent Dykes.
I mean, this would be a question for all of you. Doug, I guess, is left for a little bit. The three of you talked about student enrollment increasing this year, but for the last year and a half, all we've heard about is the enrollment cliff in 2026. How is everybody planning for that? I mean, is there any better idea what the change in enrollment possibilities
Well,
could be for everybody?
An example for us is we get a lot of students from Illinois, and Illinois is expecting a 9% decline in college-going students in the next several years. So, okay, there's a pool that's dropping. So our strategy is more online and more competency-based education to help people who want to come back to college to get credentials for their job and things like that. So our strategy is we don't expect to be hitting the number we expect to hit last year and this year in 2026. If we do, we're getting it from somebody else. So we're focusing on out-of-state students. I don't mind, hurting another state, but I don't want to hurt my friends back here. And then on the other side, is you can't rely on the way you've always done it. So you have to have strategies for other cohorts to go and focus on your enrollment strategy. Can't focus on the way it has always been, or you will drop a lot. And so ours is CBE, competency-based education, online, and then focusing our strategy on those different cohorts in terms of marketing and outreach and scholarshiping to keep where you are.
I'm thinking more of the budget and the numbers and if you're not able to maintain on the marketing and bringing students in, how's the budget? How are you going to plan for that?
You have to focus probably more resources in which is what we're all doing and we're doing. And thank you for the state for this. Student retention is a big variable that can help offset that drop that may come. So we're putting more resources in marketing and student retention and development of online Jayhawk Global for us. All those we're investing in. That's part of that. That's part of where we're using our cash to invest in those so we come out the other end on the positive side. So you can't just do nothing. Your point, you're gonna have to invest probably to make those things work. I don't know if any.
Chair Benson, I have one more
Yes,
question.
absolutely.
On your final actions, you've mentioned that we are increasing the support for student success initiatives. But on your consolidated expenditure side, I see a 50% reduction in expenses for student services. So is that like a?
Just this year, we consolidated our advisors and we've increased their pay and others. So this is this came 2 years ago, last year, I believe, then this money came in. So we have, that's a more recent thing in terms of, I don't know if it will show up in 23, but it will show up in 24.
Yeah. Thank you.
A lot. So.
Any other questions for Jeff? All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. All right, next up, review board agenda items under fiscal affairs. Everything is on consent agenda for this afternoon. Any of my fellow regents want to pull any of those items off for discussion? If not, would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll move.
Okay, we have a motion by Regent Parasker, second by Regent Dykes. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Items approved. All right, next step, capital renewal initiative. Chad Bristow, anything?
So Chad, you're working some more on the space inventory, data collections and.
Yeah, exactly. And the only other thing is finalizing a space needs analysis tool that compares what the universities have for spaces now that they're using, and it's represents a planning tool that can then compare that with the spaces that they aspire to have. So really exciting tool that we'll have later this spring.
All right, look forward to that. All right, thanks, Chad. All right, another standing item is audits for committee review and discussion. Vice President Frisbee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a draft from Legislative Post Audit on the DEI foreign gift and contract reporting audit. That will be released to the public next Wednesday at noon in the Legislative Post Audit Committee. Dr. Flanders will be in attendance there, as will I, and hoping for a representative from each of the state universities in case there are questions. Looking forward to having that discussion. And then I would also just point out, not quite as connected to us, but the community college athletics audit was released last week in Legislative Post Audit Committee, and that is an audit that's out in the public world and can certainly share the copy of that if you have interest in seeing that.
I'd like to see that if you don't mind.
Okay.
Or you can read the speaking paper.
Or there are articles in the Capital Journal, I think even today.
All right, thank you, Elaine. All right, any other business to come before the committee this morning? All right, we will adjourn and we'll look forward to the full board meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you again.